All right. This is on imagination. And I am on the cusp of locating the unit of measure with which to organize and define physics and emotional energy inside of a self system. So this video, oh, this is me just finally getting defined. In physics, it must be measurable. If it is not measurable, it doesn't work. The problem is, how do you measure emotional energy? I'm going to talk about and introduce the concept of a system, because the parameters defined within the system is the point of origin. So it is the law and parameter within a system that defines the law, I should say the order of how to measure a system. So I'm going to look up the word system, because in logic, you do not do anything without first defining it. System, a set of things working together as part of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. A set of principles or procedures according to which something is done. A method, a process, system. Now, based off of all of the emotional components, my instinct, which is absolutely intuitive, logic-based, math-based, and is the accumulation and summation of all of my knowledge and feelings, I hypothesize that an individual is a self-operating system. Now, something has to be constant in order for it to apply to all of the systems. I hypothesize that every single one of our individual self-system is logic, math, and physics-based. Now, the laws of logic, math, and physics are clearly defined already. Mother Nature revolves around physics, math, and logic. The Fibonacci sequence is a phenomenal example of this particular instance. Because Mother Nature is our parent, we are built off of the exact same laws of Mother Nature. And Mother Nature is logic, math, and physics-based. Therefore, the self-system that comes from Mother Nature is also logic, math, and physics-based. I believe that when an infant comes into this world, it is 100% logic, math, and physics-based. And our intuitive logic, intuition, supports this fact. Now, here is the problem, the obstacle, the complication. According to the defined parameters, that is fascism, which follows almost identical to the needs and desires of a projected fourth ethical perspective. The fourth ethical perspective commands that they override Mother Nature's logic, math, and physics, supplanting the law of logic, math, and physics, instead with the agenda of the fourth perspective, which is a fascist ideal. Fascist ideal has thus supplanted Mother Nature, so that when you have an infant born into the world, instantly by the time the child is 2 to 4 years old. The child's mother nature of logic, math, and physics has been completely replaced with the fourth perspective fascist agenda. The child then grows according to the rules and regulations of the fourth perspective fascist agenda. There's a problem with this. There's a lot of problems with this. The primary problem that I am looking at is there are people who have a higher math and logic and physics calibration than others. Those who are highly calibrated to math, logic, and physics are incompatible with the perspective fourth fascist agenda. The less calibrated to math, logic, and physics a person is, the more compatible to the fourth perspective fascist agenda that they are. As a result, we are noticing in my studies that there are multiple variations of tolerance or compatibility based off of the collaboration of how compatible an individual is on this spectrum. The spectrum needs a name. I'm going to refer to this as the fourth perspective fascist agenda compatibility chart. Spectrum. So the fourth perspective fascist agenda compatibility spectrum, depending upon where you fall on this spectrum, is going to determine how much resistance, which is equal to pain, an individual is. This spectrum is going to allow a person to define their point of origin, which then becomes a solid 0 point starting baseline for measuring the self system. Using self-authority and the self system with the defined point of origin 0, starting baseline metric of the fourth perspective fascist agenda compatibility spectrum, an individual is going to be able to use pain and or resistance, same thing, to determine their emotional energy with their rate of growth. I can measure energy, emotional energy. Which means once I've walked through the how, it will confirm that all reality, that each individual self system, and that all emotional energy are in fact logic, math, and physics based. And therefore, with the defined formulas, we'll be able to correct the calibration and override the fourth perspective fascist agenda to reset the individual to a 0 baseline where logical mother physics intended us to be. The 0 point of origin is thus defined as 100% 0 resistance. That is the defined point of origin. 0% resistance. the greater the pain. The more resistance. If you are at 100% zero resistance, you will have zero pain. You require a point of comparison in relativity to a point of origin to measure. Zero resistance. Of relativity. So 0R is the defined point of origin. And R equals pain in an individual. Cognitive dissonance measures logic. Pain measures emotional severity of cognitive dissonance. And because it is a self-system based off of self-authority, every system must determine and define its own units of measure. Self-authority is going to be required for the individual to define their own unit of measure within their own system. Understanding that zero resistance is the point of origin, which would be of birth, which is where we are when we are born. Now, combination theory, where you are, which abstract dimension you live in. That is your point of origin. Relative to where your subconscious mind is forced to be at. That is your x-axis. Tells you the severity of your cognitive dissonance based off of the resistance. The resistance is your energy and frequency flow based off of the amount of pain you are in and or cognitive dissonance in relativity to what you want, what you ethically believe, and what you are forced by the fourth perspective fascist agenda to comply to. The problem keeps coming back to authority over and over again. Trauma begins when self-authority is compromised. Likewise, fascism runs off of the concept of a forced hierarchy system. Hierarchy exists the moment authority is removed from the self and is instead placed with a hierarchical position of power to lord over the self. When it strips self-government away and places a higher position above the self. This can be done in a form of a god, a dictator, a purpose, an agenda, a movement, politics, a country. Anytime that is done so that there is a law that exists outside of the self, a third person point of view law that reigns in hierarchy, authority above the self system is then compromised due to the fourth perspective fascist agenda. This shifts the priority of math, logic, and physics, and now contradicts math, logic, and physics to conform instead to another unit that exists outside of the self system. It takes the agenda of an invasive self system and forces it into the another, creating resistance, which violates the ethics, the growths, the math, logic, and physics of the initial self system. To measure the pang and the ratio allows us to determine precisely how severe the damage is done, at what level of abstract the individual should be functioning at. Frequency is screaming at me right now, telling me that we can measure the frequency of the different dimensions. I know we can. And once it is known to us precisely the frequency, I know we can. And frequency is already measured. These do exist on a frequency. The foundational frequencies, I don't know yet the math, but I will. Let's define them as X. The fifth and the sixth perspectives function at, let's say, X plus 2. The seventh perspective to 10th perspective, they function on a separate frequency. Right now, my frequency is so high, I'm completing things within an hour. One could almost say that it's X amount of work per time. Hour. I hate the word time. X amount of work per hour will determine your frequency. And that's X amount of work without resistance per hour equals frequency. So frequency equals X work without resistance per hour a foundational. X equals, but a visionary. Somebody who is ADHD functions at a higher frequency, being forced to function at a lower frequency, which is why they are experiencing a massive amount of energy shaking symptoms, is because they are not functioning at their appropriate level of frequency because of the amount of resistance. The resistance is causing so much friction and compact energy that a person with ADHD is actually unstable because they have an imbalance of energy, hence why they shake. And they can't focus because they have an imbalance of energy, because they are not properly managing the amount of potential stored energy, and they are not properly managing it to turn it over into kinetic energy. In order for somebody with ADHD to do that properly, they would have to accomplish X amount of work without resistance per hour. it's substantial because they function at a higher frequency. But when they are forced to comply to the fourth perspective fascist agenda, it slows them down to the point of such resistance that they can't function. Using the Cartesian coordinate system, the measurement of frequency, resistance, the ethical perspective stages of growth, the point of origin at zero resistance, and relativity, and the fact the self system is a unit that must be defined by the self authority that defines the person within their own parameters. This is very measurable. To begin, I would require combination theory, which is the evaluation of the perspectives. The point of origin with X to Y. And that would be literally their ethical true perspective, their ethical truth in comparison to their conformed resistance, their ethical truth to the conformed resistance, which will allow us to determine their condensed frequency of resistance. Which then will translate over into their quantity of pain. Physics, logic, math, and I'm going to put it in here. Economics is absolutely physics. Physics, logic, math, economics. Cognitive dissonance is thus defined as an individual's ethical truth in comparison to the amount of resistance due to the fourth perspective fascist agenda. Non-consensual authority. That then overrides, contradicts nature with physics, logic, math, economics, thus leading to imbalance and pain. To restore this, Restore self-authority. Shifting it from the fourth perspective fascist agenda away from the hierarchy back to self-authority, which is governed instead by logic, math, physics, which is here going to be referred to as natural law of ethical order. No, I'm going to call it ethical law of natural order. Ethical law of natural order. Logic, math, physics, economics, defined by the self-authority. Now, to measure the level of freedom, look at the resistance of this transition from the fourth perspective fascist agenda to the ethical law of natural order. That will allow you to define X, the level of resistance, which is another variable of this equation that we must have, which will define a person's level of freedom. To prevent this from even developing, if you are a new parent, because there are three types of people. There are the people who are under the regime and want to escape. There are the people who have escaped and want to restore. And there are the people who want to ensure their children are born free. So to escape, you will need to measure the level of freedom, resistance of the transition from the fourth perspectives fascist agenda to the ethical law of natural order. If you are escaped to restore, you will require the ethical truth with conformed resistance, which will define your condensed frequency of resistance, which will equal the quantity of pain you are in. You will need to restore the ethical law of natural order with living true to physics, logic, math, economics, free of resistance. Go where there is least pain and least resistance. You will need to balance out the amount of emotional energy within you, which will just be wherever the pain tells you not to go. Follow where there is the least amount of pain, that is your least path of resistance. If you want to ensure that your children are born free, you will need to ensure that the ethical law of natural order is intact with your child from birth. Now, the children are all born with the ethical law of natural order. You need to define the fourth perspective fascist agenda and keep your child away from it through non-consensual authority versus self-authority. To do this, you must trust the ethics of the natural order. To do that, you must educate, preserve the natural learning spiral. Preserve yours and the child's self-authority via example due to the law of reflection. Trust the ethics of natural order. Preserve the education's natural learning spiral. And ensure, nurture the self-authority self-regulation and management and learning spiral while keeping the fourth perspective fascist agenda, that is hierarchy, authority, and enforcement-based away. Law enforcement enables and disables ethical law and violates and disrupts the natural learning spiral, hierarchical authority, destroys self-authority. Mother Nature, physics. Physics is a bitch. Physics is the only punishment and discipline a human being requires to learn. Respect the physics or suffer pain. Allow physics and nature to teach your child, and there will be no law enforcement required. This is not complete. This is a rough draft. It's a really good, solid start. Thank you for being my math people. May the kindest of words always find you.